Now, our next session in some ways flows logically on from the sorts of thoughts that have been going through my head as I've contemplated the impact of this. We're now going to be joined by Damon Riscalla, who's the Head of Practice Development for Betashares, to talk about the intergenerational opportunity and some of the challenges that very human experience gives rise to for advisors. Damon, welcome.
Thank you, Toby. Hopefully I don't disappoint too much. There's zero AI in this. But what we wanted to take a look at, and something that I get asked about quite frequently by advisors in my travels, is looking at intergenerational wealth transfer and how advisors can make sure that they minimise leakage and capture that transfer as it's taking place. I've entitled this The Missing Years because I think quite often there's a step that most advisors miss. Everyone focuses on wealth transfer, perhaps from baby boomers through to millennials or Gen X, but there is a step in between, and hopefully we'll illustrate that today for you. Just firstly, looking at some facts and figures. So what you'll see here is some data that's come from the Australian Productivity Commission back in 2018, based off ABS results as well. What really stands out here, and this is tracking, as you can see, it's indexed to 2018 dollars. We're tracking cohorts or average age of birth cohort over 4-year periods for a period of 16 years. The really, really interesting thing I think that stands out is that you can see wealth accumulation is growing in retirement. So we're seeing people retiring and then potentially passing away with an even greater level of wealth than what they've had previously. And I think that's come about, via a number of facts. I think preferential tax treatment within super, greater salaries, assets outside of super. There's probably a number of reasons that we could point to. This, as I said, bear in mind, this is to 2018, but as at 2018, there was 120 billion that had been transferred, and since 2002, that was at 1.5 trillion. If we added in the figures over the last 5 or 6 years, that would explode even further. The other thing too that's happening is gifting is starting to increase. So some of you guys may have seen that with your clients, an increased willingness to gift to charities or to people outside their immediate family. I should also mention the median wealth transfer at that point was around about 125k. That is the median. We can obviously imagine that a number of the clients that you deal with, that would be skewed even further upwards. So how are these transfers actually being made? We can see here, 2018, 107 billion was made by inheritance, 12 billion of transfers made via gifts. Importantly, most of these recipients are 50 years and onwards, which is to be expected with life expectancies increasing over time. But here is the real kicker, 43 billion, so not far shy of being half that amount, is going to a surviving spouse. And when we consider that, the surviving spouse being the recipient, what we can see here is that marriage and age differences, typically, particularly for baby boomers, it's not uncommon that the male in the couple is 3 or 4 years older. And you can see that's declined over time, but there still exists a gap. On top of that, the age differential, marrying older. So what we're seeing is this period of time for between sort of 5 to 7 years, because you've got women living longer and men marrying slightly younger females. We're going to have a period where wealth is transferred to a surviving spouse, and that could be anywhere from 5 to 10 years. So that is kind of the missing step that we need to address. We do, as an advice community, I guess we tend to think unilaterally, we get used to doing things in a certain way. We are now going to have to change that a little bit. Surviving spouses will be handling a lot of money. Once again, just a little pictorial that expresses how this occurs. You know, we have a death. 95%, when it's a couple, 95% of the funds flow through to that surviving spouse. You do get a little bit of leakage, which comes via gifting or charities going elsewhere. And then as that single of that couple passes away, you can see that's where gifting kicks in and becomes far more predominant. So between the two, you're losing about 20% to gifting. It's a huge amount. You think about your own client base, potentially losing 20% of that without the opportunity to engage the future generations of those clients. It's incredibly problematic. So what stops wealth transfer? What have we seen sort of pulling back on it? Why aren't we capturing business as it flows through to children and grandchildren of existing clients? Yeah, I think there's a number of reasons. These are probably some of the main ones. We see often a child or grandchild may receive an inheritance, and what's the first thing they do? Run off and pay off their debt, whether it's a mortgage, a car loan, credit card debt, whatever it might be. So debt reduction can certainly reduce the amount that's transferred through. Sibling privacy issues, I think that's something that really does become concerning, that you may have inheritances flowing through to 2, 3, 4 children. They don't necessarily want to be dealing with the same advisor that their siblings might be. And that's where it's incumbent on us to explain to them the privacy constraints that we have as an industry. We can explain to them how we have those walls that prevent information slipping. So we can give them some comfort around that. I think sometimes that's something that we miss. A lack of generational match. And that is more so about the fact that if wealth is being transferred to millennials and Gen Xers, do you have millennials and Gen Xers in your business? People often feel more comfortable dealing with their own from a similar generation. So if you don't have a mix or a broad mix, that can be problematic. Mismatched strategies, the strategies that have worked and appealed for baby boomers may not necessarily have the same appeal for other generations. Late connection and missed milestones. We'll see in a few slides that particularly for females, surviving spouses, milestones are huge, right? So if you don't know the birthdays of children, grandchildren, those big events when their children are buying a house, the birth of children or grandchildren, all of these milestones, they add up. If you're missing them, that can be to your detriment. People don't feel comfortable with that, and it prevents that connection occurring. And lastly, not being perceived as the family advisor. That is that you're seen as the advisor to mum and dad, right? Not someone that I would necessarily want to go to once I receive my inheritance. We expect to see more inter vivos transfers, that is gifting whilst people are alive. And yeah, one of the reasons being we're seeing tinkering with super. Obviously some of the changes coming in, taxing of unrealised gains. That in itself may not be a big deal, but it's a loss of faith in the system that may see people start to think about passing on wealth a little bit earlier. I touched on this before, Australian life expectancies. So people are living longer. That's all part of it. And obviously the rise of the grey divorce. So it was probably unthinkable 30 or 40 years ago that people would get divorced, in their 50s or 60s. Fast forward to today, it's far more common, far more acceptable. We see people staying together until they get their children through school perhaps or university. And then when the time comes, they go their own separate ways. So it is becoming far, far more prevalent. So when we add all of this together, we've got the fact that you've got increased divorce rates, you've got the fact that there's surviving spouses due to life expectancy differences, and the fact that people marry at different ages. You are going to have to become accustomed and specialised at dealing with females being in charge of money. And there's a number of ways that men and women deal with financial information. We'll go through some of that, but I think it's certainly worth thinking about. But before I go on, can I just get a show of hands? Who has had that scenario with the grey divorce, where they've had a couple come in that they wouldn't otherwise expect to go through that. Yeah, a few. Yeah, good. So physiological differences. There's a few. It's interesting, this stuff. And it's stuff, some of it seems basic, but we can often forget about it. Testosterone and estrogen levels. So as men age, our testosterone falls, and as a result, our estrogen levels are higher. It operates in the reverse for females. So what you will typically find is that in terms of investing and requirements or level of detail, as men age, they start to become a little bit more relaxed about things. Females will become far more assertive in their dealings with money. And I should point out that all of this is based on research. We've had this conversation. This is not Damon making stuff up. I've used a number of universities, particularly in the US, to draw this information from. And I will also point out, I'm sure all of you have got clients that are the exception, and that obviously may well be the case. So this is from a general perspective. Some of the other interesting things, oxytocin, which is a chemical in our bodies as we age. That's the chemical that induces the feeling of community, wanting to be involved with others. So that rises. So that means that people like community events a lot more. Grey and white matter. This relates to cognitive abilities. Our grey matter, the actual ability to think deeply on any one topic, does diminish slightly as we age. But the white matter, which is the connective tissue between different areas of the brain, actually increases over time. So what you find is that as people age, they're able to draw on different experiences, different parts of their brain to make decisions. And you'll often hear this referred to as people making a decision on gut instinct or gut feel. So that tends to happen more as we age. Some of the other things to think about, eyesight. My eyesight's not great, and I'm 50, but hearing as well. So making sure that you've got slightly larger font, that it's very clear, black on very white. Hearing, making sure that you're conducting meetings, in a quiet environment with low background noise, obviously closing the door, not having that noise. And the amygdala, which is the fight or flight response. That also becomes a little bit diminished as we age. So what that means is effectively, as we do age, people become more responsive to good news and take bad news a little bit better, right? So if you think about that from a markets perspective, people can probably stay invested in more higher growth allocations for a little bit longer. They're not going to be as panicked when you go through those black swan or market downturns. Once again, how do males and females differentiate their processes in sourcing information? They say that men don't like to ask for directions when they're lost. It's absolutely true, right? It's been proven. So men will prefer to obtain information from informal sources, right? So that's blogs, websites, podcasts, where they don't actually have to speak to you as a person. Their starting point will be those impersonal sources. So for you running a business, you need to make sure that your website and that information is accessible for men. Whereas for females, it's typically more involved in a one-to-one, face-to-face type environment. They enjoy getting information from people. So there's quite a bit of difference there. The level of detail that they go through, men are very linear, sort of dot to dot to dot, point to point. We can't think as laterally as women. So once again, the way that you present information is something that you need to think about. Assessing reviews, I'm all for people having Google reviews, great, testimonials. Be aware that works less for women than it does for men, right? So women will embrace a testimonial if it's come from someone within their circle, their ensemble, someone within their community. That to them will be far more powerful. So you may think about using experiences if you're trying to attract new clients. It might be an event that you run specifically for females where they can bring a friend. Benchmarking, the way that you track investments, performance, goals. Men inherently are a little bit more competitive, like to know how they're tracking against their peers. So if you can say to them, well, you're ahead of 93% of people that are of a similar age and similar circumstance, that will be far more appealing to men. Females are far more interested in goal achievement, which is probably the more sensible thing. How are they tracking for achieving their goals? Views on investing, once again, women are better investors, and that comes about as the fact that they're a little bit less confident in investing. They end up having better asset allocations. Men trade a lot more. The reason typically that females, particularly post-age 50, maybe are less confident is they spend more time doing other stuff, right? They're far more busy than we are. Whether that's hobbies, activities outside of work itself, corporate careers, these are the things. So that money script and confidence, the way that they've been brought up with money, particularly for, as I said, the older cohort, late baby boomers, their money scripts are a little bit different to what we see with people today. And event planning, I mentioned it before, the sense of community for women is far more important. So it may be if you're running an event, running a market update might fall a little bit flat for women, but understanding how they can get their child or grandchild involved in investing will be far more desirable. This information came from a Fidelity report. It was commissioned a few years back, but it kind of echoes some of the things that I've just said. Women do have a very strong desire for financial planning, so that's great news. That means that we are a very, very good chance of retaining these surviving spouses. Most of them want to do it with a financial advisor in a face-to-face capacity. And they would take advantage of advice if offered by their employer. So, if I think back sort of 15 years ago, there were a lot of advisors that dealt with small businesses and would offer seminars or advice sessions to their employees. That might be something that's worth reintroducing. And also, 29% would seek advice when entering a new life stage. So that is retirement, it might be entering a new career, post-retirement, children, grandchildren events. That milestone planning is incredibly important. Just to recognise, I guess, how different it is, for baby boomers that are maybe 70 or 80 years of age at the moment who will be managing money, why their scripts are a little bit different, their money scripts are a little bit different. I found this fascinating. I couldn't actually believe it when I saw it in the research I was doing. But show of hands, when were women first allowed to obtain finance without a male guarantor in this country? Anyone? Whose hands up for 2015? No one? 1957? Nope. 1979? Yeah, a few hands. The answer is D, right? So that to me is absolutely amazing. I was astonished when I saw this. But my point with this is that someone who's 70 or 80 now, they may not have grown up being as familiar with money as what many of us are at this point in time. The other thing, over 50s, so whether it's male or female, there is a desire to give back. You need to have a corporate halo, particularly for women. So if you're attached to a charity, if you're involved in some type of charitable work, that is going to be hugely beneficial, right? The other thing that you can do in this space is obviously or clearly have that discussion around ESG or socially responsible funds. That will resonate with people over 50. The other thing that we need to be doing is having estate planning conversations with our clients. We need to do this early. There's no point having this, when someone is close to death, it makes zero sense. We want to bring it into the conversation and encourage them to have this conversation openly with their family as well, right? And once again, this is a great way for us to ingratiate ourselves with the children and grandchildren of our clients. Why are we doing this? Look, drawdowns typically are 3 to 5%. In retirement, we saw it before. This means that there's huge sums of money left over, right? Earnings are typically outgrowing the drawings that are coming through. We can encourage people to plan for the big three scenarios. So that's things like, you know, do they have enough money to live off? What are their investment returns going to be like? What do they need to plan for medical expenses? Enough is enough in most cases, right? So we need to be able to say to people, look, you do have enough, right? Think about your estate planning, think about gifting. These are the things that we need to talk about. Beneficiary designations shouldn't be defaults. The default position for many clients is to leave their inheritances in equal shares to children, right? Now, often with longer life expectancies, children are in their 60s when they're receiving it. By the time these children are receiving it, they don't need it that much. So once again, have these conversations early. Does it make sense to gift now? Equal isn't always fair. You know, amongst children, maybe there are special circumstances. Maybe mum and dad have gifted one child a little bit of money earlier to help buy a house. So encourage them to think about that. Death and money are unpleasant. No one wants to talk about their own death. The other thing too is that many people see this, or many clients we know prefer not to talk about inheritances to their children because they see it as a career killer. That if, you know, little Johnny and little Sally each know that they're getting $3 million, what incentive is there for them to go out and work hard? Now, rightly or wrongly, we know that is a concern for people. And discussing effective altruism. I talked before, 20% in gifting. You can have a really solid conversation with clients around this. You know, there's some websites there that actually rank charitable organisations on this concept of effective altruism, which is that we want to leave whatever charities we're leaving money to. The theory is that leave it to a charitable organisation in a socio-demographic where one of your dollars is maximised, right? How do we encourage clients to go through this? Basically, what we look for is to be able to talk in percentage terms, right? So say to our clients, well, look, you don't have to say, tell your children exactly how much they'll be receiving. You can say, look, you're each going to receive 30% once we're gone. We saw the issues that Auntie Jane had when she passed away. We want to avoid that. So we can encourage clients to have these conversations with their children in a more gentle way. Discussing it now allows for alterations, right? So if you can get the family together, start having these conversations early, that should be of comfort to your clients. Hey, as long as we get the ball rolling now, if we need to, we can change things later on. Gifts and donations are more enjoyable when you're alive to see them. And there's nothing truer than that, right? Walking past a plaque with your own name on it, something you can't do when you're in the grave. So it is far more enjoyable. It has been, once again, it's been proven with research. People get more impact out of that whilst they're still alive. The 1 more year syndrome, we need to break the habit of clients wanting to continue to work or delay drawing down funds or gifting or helping children. They delay it because they don't think they have enough money. In the US, a lot of advice firms are now implementing life coaches and actually getting psychologists to help their clients to break this trend. Spending on experiences once again delivers more happiness. So encourage your clients to think about how they spend. As I mentioned, life coaching or mental health assistance is once again something that's rising in popularity as people enter those life stages. So perhaps as a practice, you could look to form an association with a life coach here domestically. Consider a donor advised fund. These can be set up through trustees. What it enables you to do is set up a committee that discusses where that amount that's been allotted to charities, it discusses which charities the funds will be distributed to. And that gives you the opportunity not just to have your client involved, but they can appoint a successor or an additional committee member, which potentially is their child or grandchild. So once again, it's another way of embracing this concept of being the family advisor, not just the mum and dad advisor. Also, illiquid assets, right? Having that discussion around how's it to be sold, when will it be sold, what are the trigger points? Not every asset is liquid. So having that conversation also incredibly invaluable with clients and also their children. You can have them party to that conversation. Thinking about how we deal with different generations, some interesting things here. Anyone who's baby boomer in the house here today? Hands up. A few? Yep, good. So the characteristics of baby boomers: optimistic, confident, grew up with a youth movement, counterculture, competitive and workaholic, young at heart and a unified generation, very much a consumer mentality. This was the generation that grew up more affluent than any other previous generation. And once again, in my research, it was interesting just looking at the number of items of clothing pre-baby boomers that people owned. It was 15 to 20 items that people on average owned. So take out your 7 sets of underpants, it doesn't leave you with that much, right? Today, it's well over 100. So this consumer mentality, low tech adoption, and once again, there'll be people that go, I'm really good with tech, and you might be, this is a general description, but also a hugely, the largest wealth holding generation. Now, these baby boomers like to be sold, right? So you shouldn't be shy of selling them the sizzle. They like something that's customized to them. They're prepared to pay for it. They like trophies. So you need to allow for that in their planning, right? It might be the Rolex, it might be the Ferrari, who knows? But they do like trophies that demonstrate that they've done well, they've worked hard. As an advice firm, you should be detailing every little step that you take for baby boomers, right? Every little step, because they love seeing that as being part of the process, and it looks to them like you're working really hard. So use all the AI that you've heard about, automate everything, but tell them every step, right? They love it. They still like formal dress code, so don't wear thongs and a singlet, probably a suit. And they like face-to-face, they do like the long lunch. Gen X's, my generation, skeptical, cynical, sarcastic. Some people describe me as that. First tech-savvy generation, but they use tech for practical reasons. They don't love it, but they recognise the practicality of it. Very self-reliant and independent. These clients will stalk you online, right? So as I said, your online presence, important. They will stalk you before they come in. They know everything about you before you come in. The baby boomers will walk through the door. The Gen Xers will take 5 or 6 hours to figure you out before they come in. They want authentic. Don't sell them the sizzle. Sell them the steak. They just want to know what it's going to cost. They want you to give them an avenue for self-service if possible. You need to give them research. You need to have things like a value articulation statement, an investment philosophy. Back up what you're telling them with rigor. They don't like bullshit. So having all of that ready to go is going to help you. The other thing too, Gen Xers have grown up in the era where they've seen multiple failures, whether it's September 11, GFC, all these types of things. They love backup plans. So if you're suggesting a strategy, make sure you highlight to them that it's flexible, it can be backed out of, and you've got a backup. Millennials, once again, highly familiar with tech. This I found amazing. 91% of millennials go to sleep with their phone. So I couldn't believe that. But look, I'm just a little short of time, so I'll hasten up it here. But some of the things that you can do, avoid channel switching, so don't have them go from website to phone to another medium. Make sure that you can give them first contact resolution. If there's an issue, they want it dealt with really quickly. They're impatient. They love freebies. They love the buzz factor. They're going to be interested in thematic funds, giveaways, and they love links and access to external sources of information. So once again, something you can think about embedding in your website. And lastly, I'll finish up just with the approach to investing. Every generation is pretty comfortable with share investing. There are some slight differences. This graph, I think, is great. It just shows you that if people had $10,000, what would they do with it? Obviously, paying off debt for most generations is crucial. But we do see a bit of a swing to things like crypto and thematic investing for millennials. So if you haven't been dealing with that, that's something that you may wish to think about. And lastly, some of the other, priorities for each generation. We can see here that, no surprise with some of the results here, But things that you may want to think about, whether you use core and satellite approach, that will resonate with different generations. Thematic investments, once again, the millennials will be quite interested in that. The fee consciousness of each generation, it does differ a little bit. Some generations are happier to pay for active management, others hate it. So these are all the things that you can look at and consider when you're constructing portfolios. And as I said, I think we've covered most of this, but life coaching is something that you may wish to consider. Financial coaching for children and grandchildren, specialist aged care, using family equity, and other things like credit checks for all family members. So anything you can do to get the full family involved and position yourself as the advisor to that family. I will leave it at that. Toby, thank you.
Now, Damon's covered a lot in that, in terms of trying to deal with a multi-generational set of relationships. Are there questions that come out of the material? John? Yep.
Just a quick one.
Sure.
You covered growing divorce. Great. You covered grey divorces.
Yeah.
What about the other side? Have you looked into much grey remarriages, either after divorce or after the death of a spouse?
To be honest, I didn't get that far, but it's probably a fair point. Yeah. I don't know. It would be interesting. We're just sort of at the tip of the iceberg. Like, the more I've delved into this topic, I think there's a lot more to be had here, and particularly we do need to go deeper into this topic because the slippage is huge, right? And if you're a business that has got a lot of high net worth clients that are aging, you could lose a lot of business really quick unless you're on top of this stuff.
One of the things from the time when I worked in IWF as was, CC as is the blended family that emerges from that, from the second marriage. SMSFs are not necessarily the optimal solution for those. It gives rise to lots of issues around will my, who are going to be the trustees when I'm gone? Will my kids get shafted? No. Look, Damon, thanks very much.